Emily Carter stared out the bus window at the endless Montana plains, the golden grass rippling in the early morning wind. Her town was small, so small that everyone knew your name and most knew your business. She had grown up in a house that creaked with age, where the smell of pine wood and Sunday dinners lingered long after plates were cleared. Montana had given her quiet mornings, wide skies, and a sense of space. But it had also left her restless. The world was bigger than her hometown, bigger than the familiar faces of her childhood. And Emily wanted to see it all. Her decision to join the army hadn't been made lightly. For months, she had debated with herself, wrestling with doubt and fear. Her mother had cried the first time she mentioned it, clutching Emily's hands as if letting go of her would break her in two. Her father, a quiet man who measured life in actions rather than words, had simply nodded, placing a worn leather journal into her bag. Write what you see. Write what you feel. Remember yourself. Now, as the bus carried her farther from home, Emily felt a cocktail of excitement and terror she had never known. Each mile put distance between her and the safety of her past life, between the familiar smell of her kitchen and the laughter of her childhood friends. Ahead lay Fort Jackson, boot camp, and a life that would demand more from her than she could imagine. She clutched her duffel bag tighter, feeling the rough canvas under her fingers. Around her, other recruits chattered nervously, their voices blending into a hum of youthful anxiety. Some laughed to cover their fear. Others sat in silence, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Emily didn't know anyone, but she felt a strange solidarity with them. They were all leaving pieces of themselves behind, stepping into a world that could break them or make them unrecognizably strong. The bus finally stopped in front of the massive gates of Fort Jackson. Emily swallowed hard, stepping down onto the asphalt that felt impossibly hot under her boots. Drill sergeants barked orders before she even realized she had arrived. The air was sharp with discipline, with tension. The clang of boots against the pavement echoed through the compound, a rhythm that promised structure but demanded obedience. She straightened her back instinctively, a small act of defiance against the flutter of fear in her chest. Her first day was a blur of new faces, endless paperwork, and the rigid routines of military life. Names were called, bunks assigned, schedules drilled into memory. Every instruction carried weight. Every glance from a drill sergeant felt like judgment. Emily realized quickly that no one here cared about the life she had left behind. Here, she was just another recruit, faceless and nameless, expected to conform, endure, and obey. The first physical training session was brutal. Emily's arms burned as she struggled through push-ups, her lungs screaming as she ran laps under the merciless sun. She watched the stronger recruits move with fluid confidence and wondered if she truly belonged. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred a stubborn refusal to give up. When her sergeant barked, "Move, Carter," she moved, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she had promised herself she wouldn't quit. Not here, not now. Meals were no respite. The mess hall was crowded, noisy, and overwhelming. Conversations buzzed around her, snippets of banter and complaints, and Emily felt the familiar tug of isolation. She was small compared to many of her peers, less boisterous, less noticeable. Yet in her quiet, she observed everything the way some recruits strategized during drills. The subtle hierarchy that formed naturally, the moments when even the toughest cracked under pressure. She noted it all, filing away knowledge that might one day keep her alive. Nightfall brought new challenges. Recruits slept in rows of cots under harsh fluorescent lights, the sounds of snoring and shifting bodies a strange lullaby. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the bass. Her thoughts drifted home, her mother's worried eyes, her father's stoic nod, the smell of pine and baking. She missed it all, but a spark of excitement glimmered alongside the homesickness. This was her choice, her path, and each day was a step towards something greater than herself. By the end of the first week, Emily had learned the first crucial lesson of boot camp. Perseverance mattered more than talent. She stumbled through drills, faltered in marksmanship, and felt the sting of ridicule from some peers. Yet she never stopped showing up, never stopped trying. Her sergeant noticed at a quiet tenacity it refused to be broken. Emily's body ached, her muscles protested, and her pride was bruised daily. But a strange resilience began to grow within her. One evening, during a nighttime navigation exercise, the recruits were sent into the woods alone in pairs, tasked with finding checkpoints under a moonless sky. Emily's partner panicked, stumbling over roots and whispering fears into the dark. Emily kept her own breath steady, her mind sharp. She guided her partner with calm authority, whispering instructions and encouragement. Together, they found their checkpoint, arriving slightly late but intact. Her sergeant gave a small nod of approval, more significant than words. That night, Emily realized she was capable of more than she had ever believed. By the end of the first month, Emily was no longer invisible. The other recruits had begun to notice the quiet girl who never complained, who kept moving forward, even when the world seemed determined to push her down. She was still small, still underestimated, but there was a fire in her eyes, a hint of the strength that would one day define her. She began to understand that boot camp was more than a test of strength. It was a crucible designed to reveal who she truly was, to forge courage from fear, determination from doubt. Late one night, alone in her bunk, Emily pulled her father's journal from her bag. The pages smelled faintly of leather and home. She wrote about the day's lessons, the exhaustion, and the fleeting victories. She wrote about fear and how she had learned to carry it without letting it carry her. She wrote about hope, the tiny, persistent ember that refused to die, even in the harshest conditions. And as she wrote, she realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving boot camp. She was changing, becoming someone capable of facing whatever the world might throw at her. And so, Emily Carter began her journey, not as the strongest, the fastest, or the loudest, but as a recruit who refused to be broken. Unknown to her, the skills she honed, the patience she cultivated, and the courage she nurtured in those early days would one day lead her to an extraordinary act of heroism. One day, she would be more than a recruit. She would be a soldier, a savior, and a legend. But for now, she only knew this. She had survived the first week. She had survived herself. And that was enough. Emily Carter woke before dawn, her muscles screaming in protest, the lingering ache from yesterday's drills still embedded in every fiber of her body. Boot camp was no longer just a challenge. It was a relentless test that demanded everything she had. Her uniform, stiff and rough against her skin, felt like armor she had yet to earn. Yet each morning, she rose with the same quiet determination that had carried her through her first week. She wasn't the fastest, nor the strongest, but she refused to be the first to quit. The early hours were devoted to physical training. Emily ran laps around the base, the dirt kicking up around her boots, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Every step was an act of defiance against fatigue and doubt. She remembered her father's words, "Carry your fear without letting it carry you." Each push-up, each burpee, each sprint was a silent promise to herself, a commitment to survive, to endure, to grow. Her fellow recruits often underestimated her. Many were taller, broader, and more confident, boasting about prior experience or natural athleticism. Some whispered behind her back, mocking her small frame, her quiet nature. Emily could have let it discourage her, but instead she observed. She watched the strengths and weaknesses of everyone around her, learning their patterns, their rhythms, and the cracks in their confidence. It was not just about raw power. It was about patience, strategy, and endurance. Marksmanship was one of the first areas where Emily discovered her own potential. Her first attempts were shaky, bullets straying wide from the target. She could hear the whispers, the snickers of recruits hitting the bullseye with ease. But Emily didn't give up. She practiced with relentless focus, studying each movement, correcting every tiny mistake. Over weeks, her aim sharpened. Her bullets began to strike true, and even her most skeptical instructors began to notice. It was quiet progress, uncelebrated, but it fueled a growing sense of confidence that nothing in boot camp could break. Night exercises were a different kind of trial. Recruits were sent into the forest alone or in pairs, navigating blind in the dark with only a compass and minimal light. For many, the night was a place of fear, of panic. Emily had learned to embrace it. While others froze at every rustle or crack of a branch, Emily's senses became attuned to the subtle rhythms of the forest. Her instincts sharpened, her mind learning to read the environment, to anticipate movement before it happened. In the darkness, she discovered a part of herself she hadn't known existed, calm, alert, and unshakable. During one particularly grueling night exercise, Emily and her partner, a jittery recruit named Marcus, were sent to locate a distant checkpoint. Marcus stumbled repeatedly, panic creeping into his voice. Emily could feel her own fear, but kept it buried, focusing on guiding him through subtle instructions. "Left, now straight. Keep your back low," she whispered, calm and precise. They moved through shadows, over roots, across streams, until they finally reached the checkpoint. It was hours late, but intact. Their sergeant's nod was brief, but significant, recognition that Emily's courage and composure had not gone unnoticed. The days blurred into one another, obstacle courses, hand-to-hand combat, long marches under the relentless sun, and endless classroom instruction. Emily's body ached constantly, and she felt the tension of her peers' eyes judging her every move. Yet she endured. Her notebook, which she carried in a small pocket of her duffel, became her sanctuary. She recorded not only instructions and lessons, but reflections on her own fears and triumphs. Each entry strengthened her resolve, creating a mental map of what it truly meant to survive, to fight, and to lead. Emily's growth was not without setbacks. There were days when she stumbled, failed a drill, or felt her confidence waver. Her sergeant was relentless, pushing her beyond what she thought possible. She fell, scraped her knees, bruised her arms, but every setback became a lesson. She learned humility in defeat and resilience in recovery. She began to understand that strength was not only physical, it was mental and emotional. It was the quiet refusal to quit, the courage to rise again, and the intelligence to learn from every mistake. One afternoon, the recruits were tested in urban combat simulations. Smoke filled the training yard, and instructors yelled orders as recruits navigated fake streets littered with obstacles. Emily's squad fell behind, some panicking, others moving too quickly. She assumed a natural leadership role, directing her team with calm precision. "Cover left, move low. Watch the windows," she commanded. Her voice, though soft, carried authority. By the end of the exercise, her squad performed better than any other group, largely due to her composure and ability to anticipate challenges. Through these weeks, Emily began to change internally. She had started as a quiet, overlooked recruit, uncertain of her place. Now, she moved with purpose and confidence. Her peers, once dismissive, began to respect her, though she did not seek approval. The drill sergeants, initially unimpressed, acknowledged her quiet determination with subtle nods, a hard-earned sign of recognition in a place where words were often scarce. Emily's self-doubt had begun to erode, replaced by a growing awareness of her own potential. Perhaps the most important lesson Emily learned was trust. Trust in herself, her instincts, and her training. The exercises were designed not only to challenge her body, but to shape her mind for the chaos she would face on deployment. She learned to assess threats, make decisions under pressure, and maintain composure when the unexpected struck. She began to understand that courage was not absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. By the end of the second month, Emily's transformation was undeniable. She was no longer the shy, overlooked recruit who had arrived at Fort Jackson weeks before. She was stronger, sharper, and more aware. Her skills had improved in every measurable way, but more importantly, her confidence had matured. She understood that the true measure of a soldier was not medals or praise, but the ability to survive, adapt, and protect those around her. Yet Emily remained humble. She knew boot camp was only the beginning, a controlled environment compared to the unpredictability of real combat. Still, she had built a foundation, a blend of skill, courage, and resilience that would one day be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. Each early morning run, each exhausting drill, each whispered night navigation lesson contributed to her growing sense of purpose. She was no longer just following orders. She was learning to anticipate, to lead, and to act decisively when it mattered most. Late one evening, after the lights had gone out and the base fell into uneasy silence, Emily sat alone on the edge of her bunk. She opened her father's leather journal and wrote, "I am stronger than I think. I am ready to face fear. I am learning to trust myself." Her hand shook slightly, fatigue etched into every line of her body, but her eyes burned with determination. This was her journey, a quiet evolution from ordinary girl to trained soldier, from doubt to courage. She had been forged in the fires of training, and she was ready for whatever the world would throw at her. By the time Emily fell asleep that night, she was no longer merely a recruit. She was a survivor in the making, a thinker, a fighter. And though she could not yet know it, these months of grueling training would shape the instincts and courage she would need to save lives in a battle she had yet to face. She closed her eyes with a quiet certainty. One day, she would be more than a recruit. She would be a soldier worthy of every challenge ahead. Emily Carter sat in the transport plane, her uniform pressed but dusty from last-minute drills, staring at the metal walls that rattled with every bump in the clouds. The hum of the engines was a constant reminder that she was leaving the controlled chaos of Fort Jackson for a place where chaos was the only constant. Her heart raced. She had trained for this moment, but nothing in boot camp could replicate the reality of being deployed. She gripped the edge of her seat, feeling the tension in her muscles, a cocktail of fear and anticipation swirling inside her. The plane touched down on a tarmac that shimmered in the relentless heat. Dust swirled around the wheels as Emily and her unit disembarked, stepping onto foreign soil where the air was heavy with tension. This was no longer a training exercise. The desert stretched endlessly, a landscape of muted browns and harsh sunlight, with the occasional cluster of buildings, some standing strong, others crumbling under the weight of conflict. The wind carried an acrid mix of smoke, sand, and fear, a reminder that every step forward could bring danger. Her squad's first patrol was cautious. Emily noticed the subtle differences between Fort Jackson and the real world, civilians moving warily in the streets, children staring with curiosity tinged with fear, and the ever-present hum of distant conflict. Even the smallest sounds seemed amplified. The creak of a door, the chatter of locals, the soft wind carrying whispers of danger. Emily's senses, honed in night drills and obstacle courses, became her most valuable tools. Every movement was calculated, every glance assessing threats that were invisible to the untrained eye. The mission was simple in theory, peacekeeping. The unit was tasked with patrolling neighborhoods, monitoring hostile activity, and maintaining visibility to reassure civilians. But Emily quickly realized that peace was fragile. Threats were not always obvious, and every encounter carried uncertainty. Civilians glanced at the soldiers with wariness, their eyes reflecting stories of loss and survival. Emily began to understand the delicate balance of empathy and vigilance that her role required. Protecting lives meant more than aiming a weapon. It meant reading the world around her with precision and care. On her first day in the field, Emily's squad encountered an abandoned market street. Broken stalls, shattered windows, and scattered belongings told a story of sudden chaos. Emily stepped cautiously, scanning for tripwires, hidden weapons, and other threats. She noticed subtle details: footprints in the sand, the faint smell of gunpowder, and discarded ammunition shells. Each observation was a piece of the puzzle, and she filed it carefully in her mind. Even small oversights could cost lives. Every day, she reminded herself, the difference between safety and disaster was attention, not luck. During the patrol, the squad came under minor fire from a distant ridge, a test of nerve rather than a full-scale engagement. Emily's heart pounded as bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust and sand. Training had prepared her for this, yet the reality was visceral, in a way that exercises could never replicate. She followed protocol, taking cover, coordinating with her squadmates, and returning controlled fire. Her eyes scanned constantly, noting enemy positions, civilian presence, and potential escape routes. Each movement, each decision, was a dance with life and death. The nights were the hardest. The desert became a dark, unfamiliar landscape, where shadows moved like predators, and silence was broken only by the distant echo of conflict. Emily lay awake in her tent, listening to the hum of the night, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest. She thought of her family, of Montana, of the home she had left behind. She understood for the first time that war wasn't about heroics or glory. It was about survival, vigilance, and making decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for herself and for those she protected. Her squadmates began to rely on her in subtle ways. Emily's calm under pressure, her attention to detail, and her growing confidence had not gone unnoticed. In a particularly tense situation, when a suspected hostile approached a checkpoint, Emily's instincts guided the squad to hold positions rather than escalate. The decision prevented a potential firefight. Her sergeant, observing from a distance, gave a rare nod of approval. Emily felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. This was the first time she realized her training, patience, and instinct had real-world consequences, and she carried the weight of that responsibility solemnly. Days turned into weeks, and Emily grew more attuned to the rhythms of deployment. She learned to read subtle cues, changes in civilian behavior, shifts in the wind that carried distant sounds, and the patterns of local wildlife that could indicate movement. Every patrol became a lesson, every observation a survival skill. She began to trust herself, not just her training, but her instincts. It was a balance she had never experienced before, and each day strengthened her resolve, sharpened her focus, and steeled her nerves for the challenges ahead. Despite the danger, Emily found moments of unexpected humanity. She helped a local child reunite with her family, shared water with elders, and offered reassurance to frightened civilians. These small acts reminded her why they were there. War was not only about confrontation, but about protecting the innocent and maintaining hope amidst chaos. Emily began to understand that courage was not only about facing enemies, it was also about protecting the weak, making decisions that upheld life in a world determined to destroy it. As the unit prepared for their next mission, Emily felt a growing sense of anticipation mixed with anxiety. Reports of increased hostile activity had reached her squad, hinting at trouble on the horizon. For the first time, the controlled challenges of boot camp and minor engagements or giving way to the reality of full-scale danger. Emily's instincts were alert, her senses sharpened, and her mind constantly analyzing potential scenarios. She knew that whatever lay ahead would test every ounce of courage, every lesson learned, and every hard-earned skill she possessed. She stood at the edge of the camp one evening, watching the sun dip below the jagged horizon. The sky was a fiery orange, streaked with clouds, the heat of the day lingering in the desert sand. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the world around her, the distant hum of vehicles, the faint voices of locals, the wind whispering across dunes. She felt small, and yet connected to something larger than herself. She was no longer just a recruit. She was a soldier, responsible for lives, capable of decisive action, and poised to face whatever challenges the mission demanded. In that moment, Emily Carter understood that deployment would define her in ways boot camp never could. The training had forged her body and mind, but it was her instincts, her calm under pressure, and her unwavering resolve that would carry her through the dangers to come. She couldn't predict what lay ahead, but she was ready to meet it. Her journey from recruit to soldier had taken another step forward. The real test was approaching, and Emily felt a quiet, determined readiness stirring deep within her. The desert night was unusually quiet. The patrol had returned to a small village on the outskirts of the region, a settlement that seemed frozen in time, with crumbling mud brick walls and narrow alleyways that wound like a labyrinth. Emily Carter sat at the edge of the camp, rifle across her lap, scanning the horizon. The sun had long disappeared, leaving the desert bathed in moonlight. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, merging with the shapes of the tents and vehicles in the small compound. There was a stillness here that felt wrong too perfect, almost rehearsed. Her squad was weary but alert. Their leader, Sergeant Lawson, had instructed everyone to remain vigilant. Even the quiet nights can hide the deadliest threats, he reminded them, his voice low but firm. Emily nodded silently. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something in the air told her this night would test every lesson she had absorbed in boot camp and on deployment. There was tension beneath the calm, a subtle vibration in the wind that seemed to hum with danger. Emily's gaze traveled across the village, noting small, seemingly insignificant details, the faint flicker of light behind a broken wall, a shadow that moved slightly against the rhythm of the wind, a set of footprints in the sand that led nowhere obvious. Her training had taught her to notice anomalies, patterns that didn't belong. She whispered her observations to herself, cataloging each one mentally. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. She knew something was coming, though she didn't yet know what form it would take. As the night deepened, she began walking a slow perimeter around the camp, rifle held loosely but ready. Her squadmates watched her with quiet curiosity. Some didn't understand why she was so alert, while others trusted the intensity in her eyes. Emily moved like a shadow, silent but purposeful, her senses stretched taut. Every sound, the shifting of sand, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, became a clue, a potential warning. She remembered her instructor's words. A soldier sees everything, misses nothing. Hours passed with no sign of hostiles, yet Emily did not relax. She crouched behind a sandbag, listening to the subtle creaks and sighs of the village at night. The wind whispered against broken walls, carrying dust and the faint aroma of cooking fires long extinguished. Her thoughts flickered to home, to Montana, to the life she had left behind. Fear tried to creep in, but she pushed it down, replacing it with focus. Survival wasn't about bravery in the abstract. It was about preparation, observation, and decisive action when the moment arrived. Her squad gathered near a small fire, sharing whispered stories to calm nerves. Emily joined them silently, pretending to eat, though her attention was elsewhere. She noticed a small figure darting across a distant rooftop, a fleeting glimpse that could have been a trick of the light. But her gut tightened. Something about the movement was deliberate. The recruit instinct within her, honed over months of training and field experience, signaled danger. She glanced at Sergeant Lawson, who was scanning the horizon, unaware of the subtle cues Emily had already detected. The hours dragged on. A tense silence settled over the village. Emily felt her body on high alert, senses flicking between the faint sounds of shifting debris and the patterns of the stars above. Her squad mates began to relax, some dozing near the fire. Emily remained vigilant. She recalled the countless nights spent in boot camp, practicing navigation and ambush drills in the dark. Those lessons, repetitive and grueling at the time, had etched into her muscle memory. Now they whispered a warning. The calm was not peace. It was a trap. Emily moved again, circling the perimeter, flashlight off, relying on moonlight and instinct. She noted new footprints, fresh in the sand, leading toward the western edge of the village where cover was abundant. Her pulse quickened, but she remained silent, crouching low, calculating. She wasn't going to act yet. She needed confirmation. Boot camp had taught her patience. Hasty decisions in the dark could be fatal. Yet the signs were clear enough to ignite a spark of anxiety. She adjusted her position, rifle steady, eyes scanning every shadow. Suddenly, a subtle sound broke the monotony, a faint metallic click in the distance. Emily froze, heart hammering. Every recruit in her squad had their own reactions to fear, but Emily's body responded with instinctive readiness. She identified the source, movement behind a pile of rubble, subtle but deliberate. Her mind raced through scenarios. Ambushes often relied on surprise, but she had prepared for this. Months of drills, navigation exercises, and combat simulations ran through her memory like a fast-forward reel. She recognized the pattern instantly. Enemy positions were being scouted, traps were being laid. Emily returned to her squad, whispering her assessment to Sergeant Lawson. "They're moving along the west perimeter. Could be scouts or an ambush," she warned, her voice low but firm. The sergeant frowned, eyes narrowing. "Stay sharp. Everyone double-check positions," he ordered. Emily noticed subtle glances toward her from the more skeptical recruits. The same ones who had once dismissed her presence now watched with cautious curiosity. She did not seek approval. She only sought readiness. As the first hints of dawn crept along the horizon, the desert remained deceptive in its beauty. Golden light streaked across sand and rubble, masking hazards beneath its glow. Emily crouched near the squad's edge, rifle ready, scanning the terrain. Every shadow, every glint, every shift of sand was assessed. Her mind raced through potential strategies, escape routes, and contingencies. The tension was almost unbearable, but it honed her senses further. She felt a strange clarity in the chaos. The calm before the storm was her ally, allowing her to anticipate and prepare for the imminent conflict. Then came the first unmistakable sign, a muffled shout from beyond the rubble, a glimmer of movement that was not part of the environment. Emily's body went rigid, senses screaming in synchronization. The ambush she had feared for hours was imminent. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening focus, slowing time. Her squad, still partially unaware, relied on their training, but had yet to recognize the danger fully. Emily knew she had to act fast, yet carefully. Panic was the enemy. Precision and timing would be their salvation. Emily took a deep breath, steadying her racing heart. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, recalculated the positions of her squad and the approaching threat, and prepared mentally for the decision she would soon have to make. In that tense silence, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The calm before the storm had ended. Soon, chaos would erupt, and the recruits' lives would depend on the instincts Emily had honed through months of grueling training. She was ready. And as the first shadows of the ambushers crept closer, Emily Carter's journey transformed. She was no longer just a recruit in a foreign land. She was a sentinel, a protector, and a thin line between her squad's survival and annihilation. The storm was coming, and she would face it head-on. The desert night erupted in chaos before Emily could fully comprehend it. A sudden hail of gunfire tore through the stillness, shattering the calm she had clung to for hours. Bullets kicked up sand around the squad's positions, the sharp cracks echoing across the village. Explosions tossed dirt and debris into the air. Her heart raced, adrenaline surging as every sense screamed alert. Emily dropped to the ground instinctively, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning for movement, calculating every angle, every possible line of fire. The first volley struck near Sergeant Lawson, throwing him to the ground. Shouts and screams filled the air, mixing with the roar of gunfire. Some recruits froze, panicked, unsure which direction to move. Others returned fire blindly, spraying bullets into the shadows. Emily's mind, however, remained clear. Training kicked in. She identified the enemy's positions by muzzle flashes and the sound of their footsteps. Her instincts, honed over months of drills and fieldwork, guided her movements. This was real. Lives were on the line, and she had to act. Emily crawled low through the sand, ducking behind a crumbling wall. Smoke and dust swirled around her, stinging her eyes, coating her tongue with grit. Her squad was pinned down, scattered, unable to regroup. Sergeant Lawson, wounded, struggled to rise, shouting orders that barely pierced the chaos. Emily's mind raced. She knew she could not stay with the group. They needed leadership, precision, and action. And right now, she had to take the initiative. This was her moment. She peeked over the wall, rifle steady, analyzing the attackers. A small cluster had flanked the squad, attempting to cut off escape routes. Emily's pulse throbbed in her ears, but her breath remained measured. She had studied ambush scenarios countless times during training, and now it was happening in real life. Every instinct screamed to move, to strike decisively. Emily whispered to herself, one step at a time, focus, survive. She aimed, firing controlled bursts, picking off enemies one by one while keeping low, moving silently across the battlefield. The chaos of the ambush was overwhelming. Screams of injured recruits mingled with the crack of gunfire. Dust choked the air, and the night became a blur of shadows and noise. Emily's body moved automatically, muscles recalling every drill, every simulation. She darted from cover to cover, suppressing fire where needed, creating distractions that allowed her squadmates to reposition. Each shot was calculated, each movement deliberate. Her courage was not reckless. It was precise, strategic, born of instinct and training. One enemy combatant crept behind her, moving silently through the darkness. Emily felt it before she saw him, the subtle shift in sand underfoot, a faint reflection of moonlight on a weapon. With reflexes sharpened by months of boot camp, she turned and fired, neutralizing the threat instantly. Her heart pounded, but there was no time to pause. The ambush was far from over. Every second counted. The survival of her squad depended on her decisions, on her ability to think clearly amid terror. Emily noticed Sergeant Lawson struggling to coordinate the team from a fallen position. She shouted instructions, her voice cutting through the chaos. Cover left, move low, hold your line. Her squad began to follow, inspired by her calm assertiveness. The ones who had doubted her skills earlier now relied on her instinctive command. Emily realized she was no longer just a recruit. They looked to her for leadership, guidance, and courage. And she would not let them down. The ambushers adjusted their positions, attempting to encircle the squad. Emily's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, and escape routes. She remembered every night navigation drill, every ambush simulation, every lesson drilled into her subconscious. Slowly and methodically, she began to counter their movements, using terrain to her advantage. Sand dunes, rubble, and shadows became weapons in her strategy. Her body moved fluidly, a blend of instinct, training, and survival instinct. Every enemy neutralized brought her closer to saving her team. At one point, an explosion threw her off balance, dust and debris raining down. Her ears rang, but she forced herself to focus. Bullets zipped past her, some too close to count. She crawled to a higher vantage point, assessing the remaining attackers. Her heart pounded, every breath calculated. Emily realized she would have to act alone for a critical moment. No one else could reach the enemy's position in time. The decision was clear. If she failed, the squad would suffer catastrophic losses. If she succeeded, lives could be saved. Emily advanced carefully, moving unseen through the chaos. Her rifle steadied, her focus absolute. One by one, she eliminated enemy positions, using the cover of shadows and terrain. Each shot was precise, each movement deliberate. She flanked a group, attempting to strike from behind a wall, neutralizing them silently. Dust and smoke made visibility poor, but Emily's senses were heightened. Every sound, every movement, every glint of metal registered in her mind. Time seemed to slow as she executed each maneuver with flawless control. Minutes stretched like hours. Emily's squad began to recover, firing strategically and regrouping under her direction. She could see the enemy's formation weakening, confusion spreading among their ranks. Her actions had shifted the balance. The ambush, which had threatened to decimate her team, was faltering. Emily's courage, focus, and skill were turning the tide. The squad moved forward, inspired by her bravery, reclaiming lost ground, regaining control of the battlefield. When the last enemy combatant fell, silence descended like a heavy blanket. Emily sank to her knees, chest heaving, eyes scanning the desert that had just been alive with death and fear. Her squad, exhausted but alive, gathered around her. Sergeant Lawson, bleeding but conscious, looked at her with wide eyes. You saved them," he whispered, disbelief mingled with awe. Emily only shook her head, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. She had acted out of instinct, training, and necessity, not heroism, not ego. The aftermath was chaotic, but survivable. Medics tended to wounded squadmates, while Emily helped distribute water and stabilize positions. Her body ached, her hands trembled, but she remained alert. She understood that survival did not end with the fight, it extended into recovery, care, and preparation for the next potential threat. The ambush had tested everything she had learned and forced her to act decisively under extreme pressure. She had passed the ultimate trial, not through luck, but through courage, skill, and unwavering resolve. That night, as dawn broke across the desert, Emily Carter finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had faced the storm and emerged alive, her squad intact because of her actions. The quiet recruit, once underestimated and overlooked, had become the linchpin between life and death for her team. She realized that her journey, the months of training, and the grueling deployment had forged her into a soldier capable of extraordinary courage. And though exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she felt a deep, unshakable sense of purpose. Emily Carter's heart raced as the ambush raged around her. The desert night was filled with gunfire, smoke, and the panicked shouts of her squadmates. Some were pinned down, others trying to provide covering fire, but the enemy's assault was relentless. Emily's eyes scanned the battlefield, every detail feeding her mind. The glint of rifles under the moonlight, the shifting shadows, the cracks in the enemy's formation. In that moment, she realized the only way to turn the tide was to act and to act alone. Crouching low behind a pile of rubble, Emily assessed the situation. Her squad's position was partially compromised. Retreating would risk more casualties. Advancing blindly could be fatal. She calculated angles, distances, and trajectories in seconds, a mental map of the battlefield forming almost instinctively. Her breathing slowed, each inhale precise, each movement deliberate. Emily had trained for this, though nothing could fully prepare anyone for the terror of facing an organized assault in real life. Fear was there, but it was controlled, tempered by focus. She noticed a small group of enemies attempting to flank from the western ridge, intending to cut off her squad's escape. Their approach was methodical, confident, and deadly. Emily's training screamed at her to act quickly. She slid along the sand, using shadows and terrain as cover, closing the distance without being seen. Every step was calculated. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surging, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She recalled every ambush drill, every tactical simulation, and every lesson about exploiting the enemy's patterns. This was the moment to put all that into action. Emily raised her rifle, taking aim at the closest enemy combatant. Her first shot was precise, hitting the target and dropping him before he could fire. She moved immediately, shifting her position, eliminating the second and third threats with controlled bursts. The enemy was taken off guard by the sudden counterattack. Emily's movements were fluid and purposeful, each one designed to disrupt, confuse, and diminish the enemy's advantage. She became a shadow of calculated violence, unseen, unstoppable, a force that neither fear nor fatigue could slow. As Emily advanced, another attacker emerged from behind a wall, attempting to ambush her. Instinct and training converged in a single reflexive motion. She spun, firing accurately, neutralizing the threat before it could harm her. Her body moved on autopilot, recalling months of grueling drills, countless repetitions of simulations, and the countless hours spent preparing for this exact type of moment. Emily understood fully. Hesitation could cost lives. Precision, courage, and timing would save them. Meanwhile, her squad, inspired by her actions, began to regain confidence. Some crawled forward, providing covering fire. Others shifted positions, following Emily's unspoken lead. Her presence, her decisiveness, had altered the dynamics of the fight. The ambushers, who had relied on fear and surprise, were now reacting to her, confused and uncoordinated. Every movement she made disrupted their plans, buying precious time for her team to regroup and strike back strategically. Emily had become the pivot point, the turning force in a chaotic battlefield. One enemy attempted to sneak around to attack the squad from behind. Emily's senses, finely tuned, detected the movement before it was visible. She reacted instantly, taking cover behind a low wall and firing a precise shot that neutralized the threat. Dust and smoke filled the air, reducing visibility, but Emily's instincts guided her. She moved systematically, flanking, suppressing, and eliminating the remaining attackers one by one. Her mind was a calculated machine, assessing, predicting, and executing with deadly accuracy. Fear was present, but it was harnessed, turned into focus. Minutes stretched into a blur. Emily's counterattack was methodical, efficient, and ruthless. She exploited every weakness, every misstep by the enemy. Her squad, rallying behind her, began to regain control of the battlefield. Each enemy neutralized brought them closer to safety. Emily's physical exhaustion was immense, but her determination overpowered pain. She was no longer just a recruit. She was a decisive force, capable of shaping the outcome of life-and-death events. Every instinct, every skill honed in boot camp, now played a critical role in survival. During a tense moment, Emily noticed the enemy had regrouped behind a cluster of rocks, preparing for a final assault. She recalculated the situation. weighing risk and opportunity. There was no time to wait for backup. Using cover, she crawled closer, her movements silent but precise. She deployed a flash grenade, disorienting the attackers. In the confusion, she fired with lethal precision, taking down the remaining threats before they could retaliate. Her solo actions had turned a near-certain disaster into a moment of control. With the ambush broken, Emily quickly moved to assess her squad. Sergeant Lawson, though wounded, was alive and shouting encouragement. Her team, shaken but unharmed, began to regroup and secure the perimeter. Emily's pulse slowly returned to normal, though the adrenaline lingered, keeping her senses heightened. She realized fully that her actions had prevented significant casualties. In that moment, the quiet recruit, who had once been underestimated, had become the savior of her squad. Her courage, clarity, and decisiveness had made the difference between life and death. The first light of dawn began to seep over the desert, illuminating the aftermath. Sand was scarred with footprints, dust rose in faint clouds, and silence replaced the chaos. Emily stood among her squad, rifle still in hand, surveying the battlefield she had navigated alone. Medics moved in to tend the wounded. Her heart thudded heavily, exhaustion threatening to collapse her body, but she remained upright, aware, vigilant. She had survived, and her squad had survived, because she had acted without hesitation, with courage and clarity. For Emily, there was no time for celebration. The desert was unforgiving, and threats remained. But for the first time, she felt the profound impact of her own actions. She had led, protected, and saved lives. The journey from recruit to soldier, from observer to decisive actor, had reached a pivotal milestone. Emily Carter had proven not only her skills and instincts, but her courage and resilience. She was no longer just a participant in the mission. She had become its turning point. As the squad regrouped, Emily quietly checked their positions, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Her body ached, her limbs trembled, but her mind remained sharp. She had been forged in the fires of training and tested in the crucible of combat. The lessons she had absorbed over months' discipline, vigilance, patience, and instinct had coalesced into decisive action. Emily knew she had faced one of the most dangerous moments of her life, and she had emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, more capable, and more aware of her own potential. That day, Emily Carter learned a truth that would define her future. True courage is not measured by fearlessness, but by the ability to act decisively, even when every instinct screams to run. Her heroism was born from preparation, skill, and an unwavering commitment to protect those around her. And though the desert would continue to harbor danger, Emily had discovered that she possessed the courage and clarity to face it head-on. The ambush had tested her in ways nothing else could, and she had passed with distinction. The desert morning felt unusually quiet after the chaos of the ambush. Dust still hung in the air, catching the weak sunlight and creating a haze that softened the battlefield's harsh edges. Emily Carter stood among her squad, rifle in hand, surveying the aftermath. Around her, soldiers moved methodically, securing the area, tending to the wounded, and clearing debris. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the night had finally begun to ebb, leaving a raw awareness of exhaustion, both physical and emotional. Sergeant Lawson, still bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, called Emily over. His eyes, once focused solely on the battle, now held a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Carter, you saved us," he said quietly, his voice heavy with gratitude. Emily shook her head, refusing the weight of praise. She knew she had acted out of necessity, guided by training and instinct rather than heroism. Yet, as her squad gathered around, their expressions a mixture of awe, relief, and admiration, she could not deny the truth. They owed their lives to her. The recognition did not come immediately in the form of medals or ceremony. In the field, survival often outpaced celebration. Yet small gestures of acknowledgement began to ripple through the unit. A teammate adjusted her gear, placing a hand on her shoulder in silent solidarity. Another offered water without a word, respect conveyed through action. Emily absorbed these subtle affirmations quietly. She had trained for years to face danger, to endure, to survive, but the realization that her choices had tangible impact on the lives of others brought a new and unexpected weight of responsibility. Emily walked through the battlefield carefully, scanning for overlooked threats. Every shadow, every remnant of the night's conflict was a potential hazard. Her mind cataloged each observation, assessing what had gone right, what had gone wrong, and what lessons could be extracted for the future. She thought about the moments of panic, the split-second decisions, and the clarity that had guided her rifle and her instincts. For all her skill and training, she knew she had been tested not only by the enemy, but by her own limits. In the quiet moments, Emily allowed herself to reflect. Boot camp had shaped her, but the ambush had transformed her. She had gone from a quiet recruit, underestimated and overlooked, to the decisive factor in her squad's survival. The weight of leadership, even informal, had pressed down on her shoulders, yet she had carried it with focus, precision, and courage. The realization was humbling. Courage, she now understood, was not absence of fear, it was the ability to act despite it. She had embodied that lesson fully. Later, as the squad regrouped to report back to base, Emily remained vigilant. Even in the wake of survival, danger lingered. Civilians watched silently, their eyes a mixture of fear, curiosity, and cautious trust. Emily understood that heroism was often silent, uncelebrated, and weighed by responsibility. She had saved lives, yet she did not feel triumphant. Instead, she felt the quiet gravity of accountability, the understanding that each decision carried consequence. The battlefield had revealed her not as invincible, but as capable, adaptable, and alive. Back at the forward operating base, Emily received formal recognition, though in military fashion, it was understated. Sergeant Lawson praised her actions in the briefing room, detailing how her solo counterattack had prevented catastrophic casualties. Peers, once skeptical, nodded in acknowledgement, their respect earned through observation rather than ceremony. Emily accepted the praise with humility, her focus shifting quickly to the next challenge, the next mission. Heroism, she realized, was never static. It demanded constant vigilance, learning, and readiness. That evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, Emily found a quiet spot near the edge of the base. She removed her helmet, wiping sweat and dust from her brow. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a reminder of the night's terror and the fragile peace that followed. She reached for her father's leather journal, worn and familiar, and began to write. Words poured out, recounting the ambush, the decisions, the fear, and the unexpected clarity she had discovered within herself. She wrote not for accolades, but to remember, to process, and to ensure the lessons endured. Emily reflected on her journey from Montana to this foreign land. She remembered the quiet mornings at home, the creaking floors, the smell of pine, and Sunday dinners. She remembered her first days at Fort Jackson, the exhaustion, the ridicule, the doubt, and how each challenge had built a foundation for the soldier she had become. Every push-up, every night navigation drill, every moment of fear had contributed to the clarity and courage she had displayed during the ambush. She realized that heroism was cumulative, built from persistence, preparation, and integrity. She also reflected on the emotional weight of leadership. Saving lives was not without consequence. Emily had been acutely aware of the lives depending on her, the split-second decisions that could mean life or death. The responsibility was heavy, but it was one she carried willingly. She understood that courage was not measured in medals, but in the quiet moments of decision, when fear pressed close and clarity guided action. Her courage had emerged not from desire for recognition, but from commitment to duty and the instinct to protect. Emily's squad gathered around her later that night. There was a shared understanding among them, a bond forged in fire and fear. The ambush had been terrifying, but it had also revealed the extraordinary strength within an ordinary recruit. They respected her, not as a commander, but as a protector, someone whose presence had altered the outcome of a life-or-death situation. Emily felt a quiet pride, not boastful, but grounded in the knowledge that preparation, skill, and courage had tangible effects. Later, when the base quieted and most soldiers rested, Emily allowed herself to feel the exhaustion fully. Her body ached, her muscles screamed, but her mind was alert, reflecting, cataloging, and learning. The ambush was over, but the lessons endured. She understood the fragility of life, the importance of vigilance, and the power of focused action. Emily Carter, once just a recruit, now embodied the qualities of a soldier, capable of extraordinary courage under pressure. She was tested, and she had prevailed. That night, she wrote the final entry in her journal for the day. I faced fear and acted. I protected my squad. I survived and learned. Courage is quiet, precise, and alive in action. This is who I am now. This is who I must continue to be. The words brought a sense of closure and reflection. Emily knew that the ambush would not define her entirely, but it had illuminated her potential. She had discovered not only her skill, but the depth of her resolve, the clarity of her instincts, and the power of quiet leadership. Emily slept fitfully, haunted by flashes of the ambush, but comforted by the knowledge that she had acted decisively when it mattered most. She awoke the next morning changed, not by glory or recognition, but by the profound understanding of her own capabilities. The soldier who had once been overlooked had become the linchpin of survival, the quiet hero no one expected. And as the desert stretched endlessly before her, Emily Carter knew one truth above all: courage is forged in fire, revealed in crisis, and measured by the lives we protect when the storm comes. The plane ride back to the United States was silent, save for the low hum of the engines. Emily Carter stared out the small oval window, watching the clouds drift past, their whiteness a stark contrast to the desert's harsh browns and grays she had left behind. For months, she had lived in a world defined by vigilance, danger, and life-or-death decisions. Now, she was returning to a life that seemed almost surreal in its calmness. The quiet was almost disorienting. Her squad sat nearby, some speaking softly about family, home, and the comfort of familiar surroundings. Emily remained distant, lost in thought, replaying the ambush over and over in her mind. Every flash of gunfire, every decision she had made, every movement she had executed alone was etched into her memory. Relief and pride were mingled with exhaustion and a haunting awareness of the fragility of life. She had survived, but the battlefield had left marks on her, some visible, some indelible within her heart and mind. Returning home to Montana was surreal. The mountains rose gently against the sky, green and peaceful, untouched by the chaos she had endured. The air smelled of pine and earth, so different from the dust-choked winds of the desert. Emily stepped out of the airport, inhaling deeply, feeling both joy and a strange sense of displacement. This home, once familiar and comforting, now seemed almost foreign. She had changed irrevocably. The quiet roads and soft breezes could not erase the lessons learned under fire, nor the courage she had discovered within herself. Her parents were waiting at the small airport, worry etched into their faces. Their relief was palpable as Emily embraced them, holding on tightly. Her father, usually stoic, whispered, "We were so proud of you, Em." "But we were scared too." Emily nodded, holding back tears. She wanted to convey to them that she was safe, that she had survived, that she had grown. Yet words felt insufficient. She realized some experiences could never fully be translated, only understood through presence, reflection, and memory. In the weeks that followed, Emily struggled with the adjustment. The routines of civilian life work, school, quiet nights at home felt almost trivial compared to the intensity of deployment. Yet she also felt a renewed appreciation for the mundane, for the small moments of peace and safety. A walk in the woods, the smell of morning coffee, the sound of a creek rushing over rocks, all of it carried new meaning. Survival had sharpened her awareness of life's beauty, the delicate balance between danger and calm, fear and relief. Her squad's recognition had followed her home in small ways. Letters, calls, and messages reminded her that she had not acted alone in spirit. They shared stories of her courage with other soldiers, recounting her precision, clarity, and decisive action during the ambush. Emily absorbed the praise silently, humbled. She had acted instinctively, guided by training and responsibility. But now she understood that her heroism had tangible impact, not only in saving lives, but in inspiring confidence, trust, and courage in others. Emily also reflected on her personal growth. The young recruit who had once doubted herself, who had feared being overlooked or underestimated, now recognized her own strength and resilience. She had discovered that courage was quiet, that leadership was not about authority, but action, and that clarity under pressure could define outcomes. She carried these lessons into her civilian life, realizing that survival in combat had prepared her for challenges beyond the battlefield, decision-making under stress, emotional resilience, and unwavering focus. One evening, Emily returned to her favorite spot in Montana, a small hill overlooking the valley near her home. The sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and pink, clouds drifting lazily in the gentle breeze. She sat on a rock, taking in the view, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Memories of the ambush surfaced, the fear, the chaos, the adrenaline, and the profound clarity she had felt. She realized that those moments had defined her in ways she could never have anticipated. She had been forged by fire, tested by circumstance, and had emerged stronger, braver, and more self-aware. Emily thought about the soldiers she had fought beside, the camaraderie forged in danger, the trust that had been absolute and unspoken. The ambush had revealed the depth of her courage, but it had also revealed the power of unity, loyalty, and responsibility. Every action she had taken was intertwined with the lives of her squad mates. She had learned that heroism was not solitary. It was connected, a ripple effect of skill, instinct, and care for others. In quiet reflection, Emily acknowledged the complexity of her emotions. Pride mingled with humility, joy with lingering fear, relief with a heightened awareness of mortality. She had faced death and emerged alive, but the experience had left an indelible mark. She realized that courage was not a fleeting moment of bravery, but a continuous commitment to act decisively, responsibly, and selflessly when the moment demanded. Emily understood that this understanding would guide her for the rest of her life. Emily also began to mentor younger recruits who arrived at Fort Jackson in later months. She shared her experiences not as stories of glory, but as lessons in vigilance, preparation, and calm under pressure. Her journey from a quiet, underestimated recruit to a decisive, courageous soldier inspired others to recognize their own potential. She emphasized that fear was natural, but focus and action were choices, and those choices defined a soldier. Emily's story became a beacon of courage, illustrating that ordinary individuals could rise to extraordinary challenges. As the months passed, Emily's life gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. Yet she carried the lessons of the desert with her lessons in courage, leadership, vigilance, and empathy. She volunteered in her community, supporting veterans, teaching young cadets, and advocating for mental health awareness among soldiers. She understood that the battlefield had changed her, but it had also given her a responsibility to use her experiences to help others, to inspire resilience, and to ensure that courage was nurtured wherever it was needed. One crisp morning, Emily stood at the edge of the Montana wilderness, feeling the wind against her face. She thought back to that fateful night, the ambush that had tested her in every conceivable way. She remembered the fear, the clarity, and the action that had saved lives. And she smiled quietly, knowing that she had discovered something profound. The hero she had become was not defined by accolades or recognition, but by her willingness to act with courage, precision, and care when the world demanded it. Emily Carter had returned home forever changed, but not broken. The desert, the ambush, and the nights of fear and focus had forged her into a soldier, a protector, and a leader. Her journey was a testament to resilience, courage, and the extraordinary potential within ordinary individuals. She had faced the storm, survived, and learned that true heroism was not measured by recognition alone, but by the impact of decisive action in moments that truly mattered. And as the sun rose over the Montana hills, Emily Carter stepped forward, ready for the next chapter of her life, carrying with her the lessons, courage, and clarity of the soldier she had become.